Hey guys, we're back with exploring world history, and we're going to do lesson number 1, and it's called "It Begins with God." Okay, and as we've talked in other lessons, there's basically two general worldviews, right? One with God and one without God. Okay, you can call those whatever you want. You can call it Christianity versus evolution. You can call it atheism versus deism, but whatever you want to call it, it breaks down to two different belief systems. You either believe in God or you don't. And you either believe in God of the Holy Bible or you don't, okay? And so this chapter of your book, basically it talks about how the most important part of human history is mankind's relationship with God. And that is the fundamental place that we're going to start for all of our lessons here, and specifically in this book. And it starts with how God created man in his image, right, in Genesis, and how everything that happens since then is a result of that. And how God is the creator and the sustainer. And unfortunately, though, most people don't have a personal relationship with God throughout history. And so they're looking for their spiritual quest, if you'll want to use the words of the book, in everything other than God. And so we need to focus as we study this history as the beginning is with God, okay? And the quest is to know God is mankind's most important task, okay? God defines who we are as human beings. Go back to Genesis, right? And it talks about we were made in his image, as we already said. And then everything since then. We have a responsibility to fulfill God's purpose for us. Without this fundamental knowledge of God, the study of world history is meaningless and pointless. Okay? So, then why do we study it? Well, we study it to figure out lots of things, but specifically where we fit in to God's whole plan, right? So, world history and your purpose. What is it? Human history sheds light on our identity and purpose. We can learn lessons from world history. That's one of the most significant things that I think when I study world history and I teach world history is the lessons that we can learn and hopefully not repeat, the bad things, and then hopefully learn from the good things and make them better. So many different lessons that we can learn from world history. World history also helps us understand the world in which we live and in which we seek to honor God. There's next it says, you will not fully understand the world in which we live unless you learn the strands of history and how they're related to each other. And this is extremely, extremely important. You want to understand, the conflicts that are going on in the Middle East, go back through history and understand all of that. Literally all the way back to Ishmael and Isaac, correct? Or you want to understand, what's going on in Afghanistan, go back and look at the history. You want to understand what's going on, pretty much in Africa, in Europe, in the United States. You've got to look at the history to be able to completely understand what's going on. And if you don't do so, then your scope is very limited, your knowledge is very limited, and your understanding is going to be very limited. So, as we go through this, just keep these things in mind, okay? You have to understand those strands of history and how they are related to each other. Ultimately, you have to understand that world history begins with God and will end with God. That's the bottom line. Read your Bible. It gives you kind of the outline of what's going to happen, and then we filled in everything else in between there with, with the history of what's going on. World War II isn't mentioned in the Bible, but it starts with Adam and Eve, and it ends when God comes back on the earth. So that's the important part. Remember that we're paying attention to those as we go through this class. Thanks.